You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Charge upon the land, a population burned up, bled dry. The marginalized multiply and unite to fight.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is David Story. On the line, we have as guests Douglas Williams, an organizer and educator with the Machinists Union, Brian Conlon, an organizer with AFGE, both of them contributing editors at Strikewave. Calling in, we have Jonathan on the line. He wanted to talk to us about politics getting in the way of organizing in the South. So, Jonathan, you're on the air. What was your comment?
Jonathan?
Oh no, did we lose him?
He's queued up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hey, sorry about that. All right, so I know that earlier you were discussing how it's been difficult to connect with the conservative, it's kind of the Republican voter here in the South when you're trying to bring in workers. And I think that you can do that. It's really about messaging, because the Republican concept, the conservative concept is we want people who work to get paid and people who don't work not to, right? We value the value of labor. And when we hear, a lot of times the message that we hear from organized labor is we want to figure out how to more equitably split the pie. Whereas what we want to hear is how can we make more pie to split? You know what I mean? And that's really the difference there. And I mean, there are some things that you could key on that I think would get you a lot more traction. For instance, would you guys support an across-the-board embargo on Chinese imports until such time that all of the slaves in China, there's 4 million of them, are released verifiably? That's the kind of message that would really, really do a lot of good things for catching fire in the conservative ranks here in the South. I mean, my son's a union member, and I think the union's been good for him. But, the concept of class warfare doesn't play well in the South too well, you know what I mean?
Well, now, as far as Chinese imports, unions always use American union labor, American union-made products. They do not, anytime a union buys anything, it has to be made in America by American union labor.
Well, I think what he's talking about is on a legislative or a level, would the unions support an embargo?
Exactly.
I can say personally, I've been very outspoken on tariffs. I think I love the tariffs. That was one of the things that I actually cheered on Donald Trump early on for, was putting the tariffs in place. But what Douglas or Brian, y'all have any comments on that?
Doug, do you want this one or do you want me to take it?
Sounds like Doug may still be out on his smoke break. Brian?
No, he's here. He's here.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think part of the problem is I don't think the problem is you've got a super majority of the people running the show who wouldn't agree to those tariffs because they like cheap labor, and that includes right-wing politicians
and left-wing politicians.
The problem with it more than anything else is it's really selective. People are more than willing to talk about China, but they aren't willing to talk about Thailand. A while ago, I wrote a piece about why unionism needs to be internationalist and needs to be concerned about the interests of all working people, because if it isn't, it is too easy to pit one chunk of the working class against another chunk. I single out Thailand because y'all ran an ad with of the machinists talking about how Harley Davidsons are union made. Well, Harley is offshoring a lot of stuff to Thailand, and Thailand is currently run essentially by a military dictatorship with a monarchy put in charge, and there's ongoing struggles against that monarchy and has been for quite some time. And they have some of the absolute worst labor laws in Southeast Asia, and that's really saying something. So
right. Well, and I totally understand what you're saying, but let me just say that, my daddy brought me up that you take the low-hanging fruit when you're hungry. You know what I'm saying? And what I'm saying is that you can get, I believe, an overwhelming majority of both left and right-wing politicians, if there's enough publicity put on it, to say we will not import any more. Now, forget about tariffs. I'm talking about an embargo on all Chinese imports until the literal slaves. I'm not talking about the cheap labor. I'm talking about the freaking slaves that are in concentration camps in the numbers of 4 million that are being leased out to Nike to make cheap goods to bring into the United States. That's just insane. We've got to, if you want to stand up for labor, let's stand up for labor. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. But what we're talking about is organizing people. We're talking about organizing people at ULA, at the United Launch Alliance in Decatur. And so, like, when he's talking to his conservative member, I don't think that what the International's United States legislative agenda is going to, I mean, I could be wrong.
Let me tell you why that's incorrect.
But I think
the reason that's incorrect is because if we stopped importing all that stuff from China, we'd have to get it from somewhere. It would make it possible for us to get it from a pop-up. We used to make all of the fabric for cubicle panels up in North Carolina, right? We don't do that anymore. We import all that stuff from China. I mean, Herman Miller, all those other places that actually build their own cubicle panels, they still have to import those fabrics from China. It's ridiculous, right? We can make that stuff here.
Most of the textile manufacturing's been moved from China. It's down in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Bangladesh. Like it's more than just China. China's an easy target because they're sort of the big boogeyman of the national security state. And to be honest, like that isn't really the big problem facing working people. Like you talk about growing the pie, and growing the pie is important, sure, but the problem is like you do have to be concerned about how that pie is distributed, because eventually once people have a certain amount of power and money, they're going to use that to re-entrench their power and money and use it to screw over working people. Like that's just how the world is.
If we get the labor, an extra 10% of the pie, but we're not making any pies at all, then there's a problem, right? We've got to make a situation where we can equalize the competition. And I've asked my conservative friends, and I have friends that are more conservative than me, would we be willing to pay 15% more at Walmart in order to free the slaves in China? They say, yes, absolutely. You know what I mean? And I do focus on China because it's low-hanging fruit. I think we need to reinvigorate manufacturing here, and we need to stop importing from all these places. But if we could stop bringing in $700 billion a year worth of stuff from China, that would be a good start, wouldn't you think?
So I just want to, sort of jump in here. So one thing that, I don't know if you would say it's a hobby or specialization or whatever, is I'm very, conscious of the sort of rhetoric that we as labor and as sort of left-wing, political and working class activists that we take on, right? And so, when we make these sorts of arguments, we have to be very careful that we're not simply appropriating the rights sort of arguments about internationalism and workers and stuff like that for our purposes. So the thing is that, I'm not going to sit here and necessarily defend, as I'm pretty sure you're talking about the situation with the Uyghurs in Southwest China.
And the unapologetic Christians and the anti-communist thinkers. Those are those are the groups that make up those 4 million slaves in China.
Absolutely. And so the thing is that when we discuss labor and we discuss these international issues, we have to keep foremost in our mind the sort of backbone and driving force of unionism, both here and abroad. And it's internationalism, it's solidarity. It's that when we talk about pursuing policies like embargoes, which have been historically shown not to necessarily hurt the governments that they're targeting, but the working class that have to live under those governments. We have to really make sure that in our efforts to build up American industry and to make sure that American workers not only get more of the pie, but that we expand the pie in order to give more to American workers, that we're not pursuing a rhetorical infrastructure that will have a negative impact on our brothers, sisters, and comrades abroad, because either our labor solidarity is international,
When I hear that,
or it's nothing,
I hear
right?
that you are okay with slave labor in China as long as you can make money here on the upper levels of your union organization,
No,
as
we're
opposed to at the low end. That's what I
slave
hear.
labor in China
Hold on,
or anything like that. Like part of the problem is, like, you're talking about slave labor in China, but you're not willing to address, like, are you willing to ban sort of forced prison labor here in the United States? Angola prison in Louisiana is literally an explantation that continues to have mostly black people pick cotton, and the descendants of overseers serve as guards. Are you going to talk about abolishing that?
Absolutely. Any forced labor, I
then at
think,
least
should
you're
be
consistent.
illegal.
It's better than you can say for a lot of folks.
But the thing is that here's the most important thing. The question is how to connect with the conservative in the South, because they do have things that overlap. But the unions have things that overlap. I mean, we believe if you're going to spend money from the government money, we believe spending money on job training is better than just spending money arbitrarily on handouts. Unions do great job training, right? Somebody is out there and they're trying to figure out how to get their life started. They get in a union, they learn a trade, they make lots of money, right? That's a good thing. That's a positive message that the conservatives can grab onto. But as long as you're going to be running around calling the workers in China your comrades, and not being willing to condemn slave labor abroad, to move more labor back here to the United States. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to be able to build whatever we want to build here in the United States without having to import everything.
And here's the thing is, I don't think he was not condemning slave labor. And I'm not going to speak for Douglas because he does a wonderful job speaking for himself, but it wasn't that he was not condemning slave labor. What he is saying was, does it hurt other workers across the international spectrum? And we have to be careful when we do these carte blanche tariffs that we don't hurt workers in other places. And honestly,
again, I wasn't talking about tariffs. I was talking about an embargo.
Well, an embargo.
But I'll leave you to that because I've got because tariffs don't have enough teeth to get this done. If they lost the American business that they're getting in China, they would have to make major reforms. And the reason is because their economy would go through the floor.
Yeah, well, so would ours, because if you look at what is being offshored by America, and that's why you're never going to get it done, because on the right and on the left, they don't have the political wherewithal to stand up to corporations and say, this is what's going to happen, because everybody's making a killing, and that's where a lot of their money's coming from.
Yeah, you gotta not give up the fight. I mean, and that's the first step in the fight. But I gotta jump off. I've got some work.
Hey, we appreciate your call. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. Yeah, but I mean, I think it's something like 90% of our antibiotics are manufactured in China. Those are things that we got to make sure that we're not going to hurt folks over. We're not going to hurt workers in China or Southwest China or Southwest Asia. And we got to make sure that we're not going to, shoot ourselves in the foot too. Those are definitely things to consider. Folks, we got one more segment here on the Valley Labor Report with Douglas and Brian. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob.
Lonely dead
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have Douglas Williams, an educator and organizer with the Machinists Union, Brian Conlon, an organizer with AFGE, both of them contributing editors to Strike Wave. We'll wrap up that conversation that we were having with the caller really quick about international trade and such. And then I did have one more topic that I wanted to throw out to Douglas and Brian while we've got them on the line. But my kind of closing thoughts on that is that I think that unions are definitely opposed to slave labor, forced labor globally. I think, and unions, anytime that there's an international trade agreement, always push for stronger labor protections in other countries to help workers in those countries and to help workers in this country so that we are not having to compete with these, with exploitation and such things like that. And unions do that. Unions already do that in international trade negotiations, and it is the Democrats and Republicans who fight against unions on those issues. But also, and I think that maybe tariffs have their place, maybe embargoes have their place. But like Douglas was saying, we do need to make sure that we take into account how it's going to affect American workers and how it's going to affect our brothers and sisters across the sea, because we have seen tariffs in other countries tariffs from us absolutely decimate workers in other countries, really hurt their ability to make money, to buy groceries, to have medicines, and we cannot, it is immoral, it is absolutely immoral in my view to say, for the sake of an American worker making $2 or $3 or $4 an hour more, that we let somebody go without medicine in Venezuela or Thailand or China or et cetera, et cetera. And so that's my wrap up on that. If anybody else wants to wrap up or has any other thoughts.
So, for me, when we start talking about how do we reach conservatives and stuff like that, well, let me tell you something. So in the referendum on right to work in Missouri, there's this county in Missouri called Cape Girardeau County. Now, perhaps some of your listeners may not know where that is or why that's significant. It's close to the Boot Heel of Missouri, down in the southeast. It is also the home of one Rush Limbaugh. In fact, the federal courthouse in Cape Girardeau County is the Rush Hudson Limbaugh Sr. United States Federal Courthouse. That was his grandfather was a federal judge. Labor broke even in Cape Girardeau County on the issue of right to work. This is one of the most conservative counties in the state. Now listen, right? We can sit here and we can make our case for unions and for collective power based on things like, embargoes abroad or not wanting to give people handouts and things of that nature. But then all we're doing is repurposing right-wing rhetoric for our own, purposes. And part of what we do with our rhetoric is not just to meet people where they're at. It's also to progress them beyond where they've been. And that's why, to me, that is a strategy that simply does not work. When we talk about these issues, we have to talk about them under the vein of internationalism, under the vein of labor progress, right? Because the thing is, maybe you would pay $4 or $5 more at Walmart if something was made in the United States. But one thing I can tell you about the workers at Walmart is that they will perceive precisely zero of that increased cost, because Walmart is a notorious anti-worker union busting company. And so we really have to be careful about how we make these cases, in that we're not simply aping the rhetoric of the right, but moving people towards a place that is more just and more equal, and getting them to see the benefits of showing solidarity with all workers, not just necessarily the ones that they live next to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's well spoken, brilliantly spoken. It's, yeah. It becomes difficult. It becomes very difficult. And, I mean, you can see where the last caller was going, and no disrespect to him, but, I mean, all we're concerned about is 4,000 slaves being held in China. And I recognize he was saying that's the low-hanging fruit, but it certainly, there's certainly more to the international workers movement than 4,000 people being held in China. Much.
I'd argue that ain't the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit's prison labor in the United States.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's what we have direct control over.
Yeah, we have direct control over it. We could get like Congress and state legislatures to ban the practice, or at least make them pay folks who are incarcerated who are working, at least make them pay minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But right now you've got people working for 50 cents an hour. Yeah, and they're doing backbreaking work, and it is
or they're doing phone banking for
Mike Bloomberg.
For Mike Bloomberg. Yeah. I mean, it's a perfect example.
Oh my gosh.
Like military equipment too, uniforms, body armor, helmets, like institutional furniture. All these things are being produced in prisons. It is a billion-dollar industry. And
that's being privatized.
And it's partially privatized, but Unicor is the federal sector's prison labor arm, and it's still government owned, and it makes an ungodly amount of money.
Yeah. It's but and it goes back to the same thing, and not being. It is going to be it's an uphill battle to fight these things when both political parties are 100% supportive of it. I mean, you may have a few, that will come out and speak out against it, but the fact is, until it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, until you have members on the ground, rank and file members, that's calling their representative or their senator and saying we're not supportive of this, you're not going to move the needle on it.
Yeah, and well, unfortunately, we had a caller ask about ballot referendums in Alabama, and my understanding...
We got about a minute left.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's no mechanism for citizens to just put something on the ballot in Alabama. It has to come through the legislature, and so that's really unfortunate, anti-democratic. But the legislature could pass a law that would open up that process for us if they wanted to. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should maybe write your representative or tell them that that's something that we deserve here in Alabama. But as of right now, there doesn't really exist any mechanism for having that. I really want to thank Douglas and Brian for coming on. We really enjoyed the conversation. Again, Douglas Williams is an educator and organizer with the Machinists Union. Brian Conlon is an organizer with the American Federation for Government Employees. We've enjoyed talking to them. Folks, tell them where they can find you here in the last 30 seconds.
TheStrikewave.com.
Strikewave.com. Go to strikewave.com and tune in again next week to the Valley Labor Report. We got a special episode for you. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments throughout the week. And we also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So you can see if we're on your listening platform of choice. You can go to The Valley Labor Report. transistor.fm/subscribe. And if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, then consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.